Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Let's dive into a world where myths meet imagination. Here we unravel chilling tales of cryptids, Bigfoot, Wendigos, Dogmans, skinwalkers, and more. These stories are crafted to ignite your imagination. These stories are purely fictitious, and names and/or events are purely coincidental. If you like these kind of stories, please give a like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell to stay up to date. Thanks for listening. Let's get into it. French Trapper Story Part 1. A Call to the Rockies. Etienne Rousseau tightened his fur-lined coat against the biting wind as his canoe skimmed the icy waters of the Saskatchewan River. The French trapper, working under contract for the Hudson Bay Fur Company, had been assigned a daunting task: to scout new trapping territories deep in the untamed Rocky Mountains. The year was 1825, and whispers of abundant beaver pelts had drawn traders and trappers. The Rockies were no ordinary wilderness. They were shrouded in mystery, danger, and the promise of fortune. Etienne's journey began at Fort Carlton, where he loaded his canoe with provisions: dried meat, flint, traps, and a musket with just enough powder and shot. He also carried a map sketched from the vague accounts of other trappers, but it offered little assurance. The mountains were an unmapped labyrinth. As he paddled westward, the river's gentle currents gradually transformed into frothing rapids, forcing Etienne to navigate with precision. On the fifth day, Etienne encountered his first obstacle. A cascade of jagged rocks blocked the river, forcing him to portage his canoe and supplies through dense forest. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, but the serenity was deceptive. As he struggled with the weight of his gear, a distant howl echoed through the trees. Wolves. Etienne's heart quickened. He hastened his pace, knowing that dusk was no time to linger. By nightfall, he had set up camp near a sheltered grove. The fire crackled, and Etienne's weary muscles ached from the day's labor. Yet sleep eluded him. The howls grew nearer, their mournful cries raising the hairs on his neck. On the fifth night, the wolves' presence escalated. Their glowing eyes pierced the darkness as they circled the camp, just beyond the firelight. Etienne's pulse raced as he gripped his musket tightly. Each rustle in the underbrush felt like a prelude to an attack. He fed more wood into the flames, the growing fire casting dancing shadows that seemed to keep the predators at bay. Minutes stretched into hours as the pack prowled closer, their growls rumbling in the cold night air. Etienne knew he could not let his guard down, yet exhaustion gnawed at him. When the first gray light of dawn broke through the trees, the wolves finally retreated, their haunting cries fading into the wilderness. Etienne's body sagged with relief, but the experience left him rattled and more vigilant than ever. As the days turned into weeks, Etienne faced trials that tested his resolve. Crossing the foothills, he encountered a sudden blizzard that reduced visibility to mere feet. The snow fell in heavy sheets, and Etienne's fingers stiffened as he fought to keep moving. He found temporary refuge in a hollow tree, shivering through the night and praying for the storm to pass. When the skies finally cleared, the Rockies loomed before him, their peaks piercing the heavens. The sight was both awe-inspiring and foreboding. Etienne's journey now entered its most perilous phase. The trails were treacherous, the paths often mere ledges clinging to cliff sides. One misstep could mean death. Midway through the mountain pass, Etienne stumbled upon an abandoned trapper's camp. Scattered belongings told a grim story: overturned pots, a torn bedroll, and claw marks on nearby trees. Bear tracks circled the site. Etienne moved cautiously to investigate further. Inside the remnants of a crude cabin, he found a journal, its leather cover weathered and cracked. The pages within told a tale both chilling and enigmatic. The journal's entries spoke of strange encounters in the wilderness. The previous trapper had written about sightings of a creature, part man and part wolf, that prowled the mountains under the light of the full moon. Descriptions of glowing eyes and unnatural howls filled the pages, along with warnings to avoid certain valleys after dark. The final entry ended abruptly. I hear it outside. If anyone finds this, beware the beast of these peaks. Etienne felt a chill creep up his spine as he read the words, the weight of the journal heavy in his hands. He slipped the journal into his pack, both intrigued and unsettled. Whether the writings were truth or the ramblings of a man driven mad by isolation, Etienne could not ignore the unease it stirred within him. He tightened his grip on his musket and moved on, his senses on high alert. As Etienne journeyed deeper into the mountains, he came across an unexpected and eerie discovery. On a jagged cliffside overlooking a narrow valley, he stumbled upon ancient cliff paintings. The reddish ochre images, worn by time and weather, depicted a creature unlike anything he had ever seen, a beast with the body of a man but the head of a wolf. Around it, smaller figures, clearly human, appeared to cower or flee. Other panels showed the creature hunting under the moonlight, surrounded by mysterious symbols Etienne couldn't decipher. Etienne knelt before the paintings, his heart heavy with a mix of wonder and dread. He had heard stories from traders and native guides about the Dogman, a figure of legend said to guard the sacred and hidden places of the wilderness. But seeing the paintings brought an unsettling reality to the tales. Were they warnings from the past, or merely the imaginings of ancient storytellers? As he studied the paintings, Etienne felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The wind carried a low, mournful howl that seemed to echo through the valley. He glanced around nervously, clutching his musket. The mountains felt alive, their silence heavy with secrets. Etienne forced himself to move on, but the images stayed etched in his mind, haunting every step of his journey. The suspense reached its peak when Etienne discovered signs of another presence in the wilderness. Smoke curled from a distant ridge, signaling a campfire. Was it another trapper or something more sinister? Etienne approached cautiously, every step deliberate. As he neared, he heard voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Peering through the underbrush, he glimpsed a group of men armed with muskets and wearing mismatched clothing. Smugglers or renegades, he surmised. Etienne backed away silently, his heart pounding. The men were blocking the most accessible route through the mountains. Forced to find an alternative path, he ventured into uncharted territory, where sheer cliffs and avalanches threatened his every move. Finally, after weeks of peril, Etienne emerged into a verdant valley teeming with wildlife. Streams glistened with trout, and the air buzzed with life. He set his traps and marveled at the abundance. The journey had been brutal, but the rewards were undeniable. Yet even as he prepared to make his fortune, Etienne knew the mountains were not to be underestimated. They had tested his endurance, courage, and wits, and they would do so again. As he gazed at the towering peaks, Etienne whispered a silent prayer of gratitude and steeled himself for the challenges yet to come. As Etienne pressed onward, he came across a group of local Native Americans from a nearby tribe. They spotted him first, emerging from the trees with bows and cautious expressions. Etienne raised his hands in a gesture of peace, and after a tense exchange, they approached. One of the older men spoke a few words in broken French, enough to bridge the gap. The tribe had seen few trappers this deep in the mountains and were curious about Etienne's journey. Over the following days, the natives befriended Etienne, offering him guidance and much-needed support. They shared their knowledge of the land, pointing out the safest passes and the best locations to set traps. They warned him about the dangers of certain valleys where hunters had vanished without a trace. Around the fire at night, they told stories of the Dogman, their words aligning with the images Etienne had seen on the cliffs. One of the younger men, named Tahoe, became particularly close to Etienne. Tahoe accompanied him on a few hunts, showing him how to track game and navigate the unpredictable mountain terrain. In return, Etienne shared some of his supplies, offering metal tools and explaining their use. Their bond became one of mutual respect, and Etienne found comfort in their companionship after weeks of isolation. One fateful night, Etienne and Tahoe ventured into a narrow, moonlit valley to check Etienne's traps. The air was heavy, the forest unusually silent. Tahoe paused, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "Something is wrong," he muttered in his native tongue, motioning for Etienne to stay alert. Etienne's hand tightened around his musket as they moved forward cautiously. A low growl cut through the stillness, resonating like a warning. Both men froze, their breath visible in the cold air. From the tree line, two glowing eyes appeared, reflecting the pale moonlight. The figure that stepped into view was monstrous, towering and broad-shouldered, with a lupin head crowned by ears that twitched at every sound. Its fur was matted, its claws glinting like knives. Tahoe whispered a prayer, his bow trembling in his hands. Etienne raised his musket, but the creature didn't charge. Instead, it tilted its head, watching them with an unsettling intelligence. Etienne's heart pounded, his finger on the trigger. "Back away slowly," Tahoe urged, his voice barely audible. They began to retreat, step by step, but the Dogman followed, its movements fluid and eerily quiet. When a branch snapped under Etienne's boot, the creature let out an ear-splitting roar that echoed through the valley. It lunged forward, forcing both men to scatter. Etienne fired his musket, the shot ringing out like a cannon. The creature recoiled, a dark stain spreading across its shoulder, but it didn't fall. Instead, it snarled with fury, its glowing eyes now burning with rage. Tahoe shot an arrow, striking its leg, but the beast seemed only enraged by the attack. "Run!" Tahoe shouted, grabbing Etienne's arm. They sprinted through the forest, the creature crashing through the underbrush behind them. Branches clawed at their faces as they ran, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The Dogman's howls grew louder, closer. They burst into a clearing where an outcrop of boulders offered a momentary refuge. Scrambling up the rocks, they turned to face their pursuer. The creature stalked into the clearing, its massive frame illuminated by the moon. Etienne grabbed a powder horn, hastily reloading his musket. Tahoe knocked another arrow, his eyes locked on the beast. Before either could act, the Dogman let out a guttural snarl and bounded away, disappearing into the shadows as swiftly as it had appeared. The forest fell silent once more, except for the pounding of their hearts. Etienne and Tahoe sat on the rocks, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. "It's real," Etienne muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Tahoe nodded solemnly, his gaze fixed on the darkness. "And it will come again." The encounter left them shaken but resolute. They knew the Dogman was no mere legend. It was a predator that demanded respect and caution. As they made their way back to camp, both men understood that the mountains held dangers far beyond the natural world, and survival would require every ounce of their courage and wit. Morning light filtered through the dense canopy of pine trees, painting the clearing in muted golds and greens. Etienne and Tahoe woke with the stiffness of men who had run for their lives. Their muscles ached, and their nerves were still raw. But the campfire's warmth and the soft chatter of birds provided a fragile sense of normalcy. As they sipped steaming mugs of herbal tea that Tahoe had brewed, they recounted the events of the previous night. Each detail felt heavier when spoken aloud. The Dogman's intelligence, its unrelenting pursuit, and its eventual retreat. "We were lucky," Etienne said, his voice rough from exhaustion. Tahoe nodded solemnly. "Luck does not last forever. We must tread carefully now. The land is its domain." The two men resolved to carry on with their work despite the lingering unease. Survival demanded it. With measured caution, they ventured into the forest that morning to check their traps. The first trap they found had been sprung, but held nothing but signs of struggle. Deep gouges in the earth and claw marks on nearby trees hinted that a predator, perhaps even the dogman, had come through during the night. Etienne frowned, examining the signs. "It's testing us," he said, more to himself than to Tahoe. Tahoe inspected the tracks, his practiced eyes scanning for clues. A wolf would not leave this much destruction. It's not just feeding, this is a warning. The next few traps proved more fruitful. A fat beaver lay in one, its rich pelt a valuable prize. Etienne skinned it deftly, his hands moving with practiced ease as he worked the hide free. Tahoe kept watch, his bow resting across his knees, his gaze flicking between the tree line and the horizon. By midday they had gathered enough to return to camp. The tension of the previous night began to loosen as they worked side by side, their routines providing a much-needed distraction. Etienne set to fleshing the hides, scraping away fat and sinew with a curved knife. The rhythmic motion and the sharp, earthy smell of the pelts brought him a sense of grounding. Tahoe busied himself preparing meat for drying, slicing thin strips and arranging them over a smoking rack near the fire. As the sun rose higher, their camp began to resemble something of a haven, a fragile sanctuary amid the harsh wilderness. Though their hands were busy, their minds were restless. As the evening light began to fade, Etienne broke the silence. "Tahoe, the stories your people tell about the dogman, do they speak of ways to ward it off?" Tahoe paused, considering. "The elders say it is not like a wolf or bear that hunts for hunger. It hunts for purpose, for the spirit of those who trespass where it reigns. We cannot kill it, but respect might protect us. Fires, offerings, and most importantly, leaving no trace." Etienne looked around their camp, at the smoking rack, the scraped hides, and the growing pile of goods they had claimed from the mountains. "Then we're walking a fine line. These traps, the work we do, it's all a trace." Tahoe nodded, his expression grave. "We must finish quickly and leave. The more we linger, the more we invite it back." That night, as they sat by the fire, Etienne and Tahoe laid plans to move their operation closer to the edge of the mountains. While the furs they'd already collected would fetch a handsome price at the trading post, their survival outweighed any profit. The men worked late into the night, fleshing and stretching hides over frames to cure. Their conversation turned toward lighter topics, tales of Etienne's childhood in the French countryside and Tahoe's first hunt as a boy. Laughter, though subdued, returned to the camp, easing the weight of their shared ordeal. But even as they spoke, both men kept their weapons within arm's reach. For in the Rockies they had learned the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was as thin as the mountain air. A reluctant departure. The decision to move camp came with a sense of urgency. The lingering unease from the Dogman encounter, coupled with the fresh claw marks near the traps, left Etienne and Tahoe little choice. The mountains had their rules, and the men had begun to feel like unwelcome guests overstaying their welcome. At dawn, they began dismantling their camp. Etienne carefully packed the dried pelts into a bundle, securing them tightly with leather straps. The cured hides represented weeks of hard work and a lifeline for future trading. Tahoe prepared their supplies with methodical precision, ensuring no trace of their stay remained. As they worked, Etienne paused to study the clearing. "Do you think moving will make a difference?" he asked, his tone skeptical but tinged with hope. Tahoe straightened from where he knelt near the fire pit, brushing ash from his hands. "It may. The mountains are vast. Perhaps we can move beyond its reach, or its interest." It wasn't much reassurance, but it was enough to keep them moving. Rebuilding the camp. The men fell into a familiar rhythm. Etienne erected a makeshift lean-to using branches and pelts, while Tahoe scouted the area for fresh game trails. They worked in near silence, each man lost in his thoughts. As night fell, the fire crackled brightly, casting flickering light against the surrounding trees. The new location felt safer, more remote, but neither man could shake the feeling of being watched. Do you think it will follow us? Etienne asked as they sat by the fire, their meal of dried venison finished. Tahoe stirred the embers with a stick. If it wants to, it will. But here we have the high ground. Fire and open sight lines will favor us if it comes. Etienne nodded, but the thought of another encounter with the Dogman made his stomach churn. Thanks so much from Cryptid Monologues for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. And hey, while you're here, check out these videos. You'll definitely love them. See you in the next one.